Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. More time. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. And in this next few segments, we're going to hear from Jagmeet Singh, Pierre Poilievre, and Justin Trudeau. And they're all going to be speaking about one is essential common thread, and it is the heartblood of democracy, that our election process. How it is that we get our vote from ourselves to a system that tells everybody that, hey, this particular person won the vote. This particular person is the one who is going to be in leadership for the next given time. And any type of interference into that process, foreign or domestic, should not be tolerated. It should be investigated, it should be rooted out, and there should be something done about it. Some sort of consequence to the whole process. If there is interference, rather it be financial, what have you. So we're going to hear each of them talk about some of that, about how their opinions about what should be done about foreign election interference. Jagmeet Singh is going to speak about strengthening our public health care system. Pierre Poilievre is going to speak about the medically assisted in death policy and what it is that they think that government should be trying to achieve with each of these things. Jagmeet Singh, of course, trying to limit, if not eliminate, corporate profit from the healthcare system, making it so that it is completely public. No one can get ahead of the queue by offering up more money. That no one can get ahead of the queue by, say, going to a different province and paying money in order to get ahead of the queue back at home. So there's a lot of questions around that, because the provinces are also saying that hey, we're running out of money towards the healthcare systems. So we'll hear about how Jagmeet Singh may want to address that and strengthen the healthcare system. Pierre Poilievre is going to talk about some of the flaws that are in the medically assisted in death policy, that it may not be fully screening people with mental health so that they aren't using the government policy as a suicide trigger. So let's listen to what is going to happen with especially the election process, because that is solely what Justin Trudeau is going to be speaking about when we play his segment. And how is it that Justin did Jagmeet Singh and Pierre Poilievre, what do they want to see in our healthcare system? Because medically assisted in death, it's medically assisted. It's healthcare. And Jagmeet Singh is saying that our healthcare system is falling weak.
I'll have some opening comments and I look forward to your questions. Today, our opposition day motion vote will be held and parliamentarians will have a choice to make. We believe that our healthcare system should be public, should be universal, should be there for people when they need it. You shouldn't have to do a GoFundMe page to raise money for a surgery. You shouldn't have to pay out of pocket to get the care you need. Sadly, that is not where we're at today. Right now, many people are pulling out their credit cards instead of their health cards to get care. We've got examples of people spending $30,000 for a surgery by going to a neighboring province and people spending over $70 to see a family doctor. While the Conservatives are applauding this because this is right out of their playbook, they want to bring in more for-profit care, no matter how much that harms the system. What is concerning is the major flip-flop of Prime Minister Trudeau, who in the last campaign campaigned against for-profit care, saying it would be bad for Canadians, and we agreed. But now he's done a major flip-flop and said that, in fact, for-profit care is good and has applauded the moves of prime ministers or premiers that are bringing in for-profit care. So parliamentarians will have a choice today in Parliament. Will they choose to be on the side of a public universal health care or on the side of for-profit care? As Prime Minister, I've made my position very clear. I will continue to fight for a universal healthcare system where we invest in our healthcare workers, we retain, we respect, and hire and recruit more healthcare workers to deal with the problem. Or, and parliamentarians can choose that option, which is what Canadians want, a healthcare system that's there for them, or they can choose a for-profit option, which will cannibalize healthcare workers in the public sector. It will pull more workers from our already overburdened healthcare centers, our emergency rooms, our children's hospitals, and will only make the wait times longer and will make increased costs. People end up paying out of pocket. That's a choice in front of parliamentarians today during the opposition day motion vote. Donc, aujourd'hui, les députés ont un choix de quelle sorte de système de santé ils veulent voir. Notre position est claire. Notre vision pour notre système de santé est un système de santé qui est public et universel, qui est là pour vous quand vous en avez besoin. Malheureusement, ce n'est pas le cas maintenant. Maintenant, on a des gens qui sortent leur carte de crédit au lieu de leur carte d'assurance de maladie. Et c'est inquiétant. Les conservateurs applaudissent cette décision parce qu'ils veulent voir plus de privatisation et plus lucrative dans notre système de santé. Mais je suis toujours surpris que le Premier ministre a fait une volte-face majeure en disant que la privatisation à but lucratif, c'est une bonne chose à faire. Quand dans le passé, elle était contre ça. Notre position est claire. On pense qu'on doit embaucher plus de travailleurs de santé, on doit investir dans notre système de santé, on doit aider les provinces davantage pour créer un système de santé qui est là pour votre famille. Et c'est un choix devant les députés aujourd'hui pour notre motion. Il peut appuyer notre vision, une vision de soins de santé publique, ou il peut appuyer une vision de santé à but lucratif où on paye plus et on reçoit moins de qualité et ça va empirer la crise dans notre système de santé. And finally, I just want to add, I want to make it very clear with the interference, the foreign interference, serious allegations. We put forward, New Democrats put forward a motion in committee, which was passed, and that motion is to have a public inquiry. We believe this should be nonpartisan, it should be transparent and public, and we continue to push for that. That is our position, and that's why we push for that vote in Parliament, and we'll continue to push for in committee, and we'll continue to push for a public inquiry that is nonpartisan and, of course, transparent. Je veux encore répéter que c'était nous, les néo-démocrates, qui avons proposé une motion dans le comité pour avoir une enquête publique. On pense qu'on doit avoir une enquête qui est indépendante, non partisan et transparent. Et c'est pourquoi on a proposé cette motion et on va continuer à mettre la pression pour réaliser cette enquête publique. Merci. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Justement, concernant l'enquête publique, est-ce que ça va être en quelque sorte... vous pourriez remettre votre entente avec les libéraux en jeu si Justin Trudeau décidait de ne pas aller de l'avant avec une enquête publique, parce qu'elle vous tient à cœur quand même, je comprends cette notion-là.
Ce n'est pas une décision qu'on va prendre aujourd'hui. Ce n'est pas une décision qu'on va prendre aujourd'hui. Mais c'est clair qu'on veut voir une enquête publique parce qu'une enquête publique, c'est quelque chose d'indépendant, c'est non partisan. Et après ce qu'on a vu dans le comité, c'est clair qu'on a besoin de quelque chose de non partisan. C'est plutôt un cercle dans le comité et où les conservateurs et les libéraux veulent gagner des points politiques au lieu de vraiment trouver des solutions pour protéger notre démocratie.
Respond in English, would you withhold your, pull your support from the Liberals?
Yeah, as I've said before, that's not a decision I'm making today. What we do want is a public inquiry because after seeing what we saw in committee, it is clear that the Liberals and Conservatives want to play a political game and score points because both parties are implicated in some of these serious allegations. And we think that it's not about scoring political points, it's about protecting our democracy. And that's why we put forward the motion for a public inquiry. We're happy to see we receive support on that. We now want to see the government move forward. We want to see Prime Minister Trudeau move forward on the public inquiry because that will provide independence, nonpartisan, and transparent way to deal with these very serious allegations.
Certains diront que dans une enquête publique, les gens, par exemple comme le directeur du SCRS ou encore la commissaire aux élections fédérales, ne pourra pas tellement dire plus. Ils vont encore nous servir les ententes de confidentialité, puis bon, les informations classées secrètes. Est-ce que c'est le bon outil malgré tout? Puis pourquoi c'est le bon outil malgré tout? Parce que ces informations-là, on ne lèvera pas le secret sur ces informations-là quand même.
On apprécie, on reconnaît qu'on va avoir d'informations dans une enquête publique aussi qui va être potentiellement confidentielle. On accepte ça, on reconnaît ça, on comprend ça. Mais la différence, pourquoi on exige l'importance d'avoir une enquête publique, c'est vraiment pour avoir deux choses, non partisan et transparent. Donc, on va avoir quelques éléments qui, à cause de sécurité nationale, peut-être ne peuvent pas être publics, mais en général, l'importance d'avoir une approche non partisane. Après ce qu'on a vu dans le comité, c'est clair que ce comité, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui travaille pour trouver des solutions, pour régler les choses. C'est vraiment un jeu politique pour gagner des points au lieu de trouver des solutions. Et pour moi, quelque chose d'assez important comme notre démocratie, ça mérite la prioritisation des solutions, de protéger notre démocratie, de garder l'importance d'avoir un système où tout le monde peut avoir confiance. Et ça, c'est pourquoi j'exige le gouvernement d'avoir une enquête publique et on met la pression particulièrement sur le Prime Minister Trudeau.
Can I just ask you more about that? While you're working to maybe convince the government to hold a, as you say, nonpartisan independent inquiry, there's still the work of the Parliamentary Committee, of course, PROC, and Conservatives on that committee have some very specific individuals they like to have testify, specifically Katie Telford and so on. And I think they're a little confused, the Conservatives are a little confused why they're not getting support from the Democrats on some of the relevant witnesses.
Well, we have supported having relevant witnesses testify, and we'll continue to do that. Let's be very clear, though, the Conservatives don't have the goal of getting to the truth. They really made it clear their goal is just to make this into a circus, to call everyone and anyone they can. And then when confronted with the option to expand it to include more witnesses that would actually get to the reality of political interference, particularly potentially Russia as well, we saw the Conservatives afraid of that because they're worried about expanding it to really get to the heart of the matter. And the difference between us and the Conservatives and the Liberals on this is we actually just want to see solutions. We want to see real transparency around what's going on. We want Canadians to know what's going on, and we want to provide a real path towards protecting our democracy instead of finding an attack point to target one prime minister. We want to target the entire electoral system to make sure it's being safeguarded, it's being protected, and we're not worried about gaining points on the Conservatives or the Liberals, both who've got some implication in this foreign interference. We actually just want to see an open, transparent, independent process that gives us the tools that we need to ensure that our democracy is protected.
Just one other thing about the Prime Minister, you may have heard last week, we've asked him about this inquiry. Among other things, he's noted that there's the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, right? Or there may be some other fora where parliamentarians are sworn to secrecy or something like that. About an hour ago, Mr. Poilievre said that that sort of forum would be, quote, a trap, a trick, if we had to swear MPs to get information and they couldn't talk about it. What do you think about the idea of, how public things should be, or should parliamentarians be sworn to secrecy, be allowed to review some of this CISA stuff?
Right. I don't want to say, I'm loath to say the words I agree with the individual you've mentioned, but I will say though, I don't think this should be in any way a private or a secret committee. This is something important that Canadians should have access to. Of course, there will be some information given that it's national security, given that there'll be CSIS information. Some of it may be required to be kept confidential, but the process should be public, and that's why I do not support a committee like the one you referred to, the NCCOP, as an option. It's not something that will provide the transparency. And really, I said two principles for me. It's the nonpartisan independence, and secondly, it's the transparency. Public should be involved in the sense that they should know what's going on. And that to me those two are the prime principles why I would say public inquiry is the best way to go.
Chris Rosenberg, the author of the 2021 protocol report, told CTV News that perhaps we need to start looking at the CSIS Act and potentially modernizing it. Is that something the NDP would support or push for, to close those gaps?
Yeah, anytime there's ways for us to protect our national security and improve legislation around national security that doesn't undermine privacy or human rights or the Constitution, we should look at ways of modernizing and improving.
And just to go back about, I know David, my friend David here, tried to get to pin you on this idea of withholding support from the Liberals or not. But this vote on that PROC report could happen in 2 days, as early as 2 days. When do you think you might make a decision about that? And who knows, maybe the Prime Minister wants to declare a confidence vote. So very shortly, it might be decision time for you. Would that be fair to say about whether or not Liberals deserve New Democrat support, generally speaking?
Well, if there is a non-confidence vote, we'll make a determination when that happens. That's not in front of us right now. What is in front of us is the fact that we want to see a public inquiry. We believe that's the right way to go. Given what we've seen, again, you can look at, if anyone's seen any of the clips of what's going on in committee, it is not a process that seems committed to finding solutions to improve our democracy. It seems more so the Conservatives want to score points on the Liberals, and Liberals want to do the same to the Conservatives. We, New Democrats, are not into that. We think that something as important as our democracy should be treated seriously and should be treated non-partisan, and that's why an independent public inquiry is the way to go to assess what's going on, the exact extent of it, and then look for recommendations for us to improve our democracy and protect it.
On comprend que tout ce qui n'est pas une enquête publique indépendante ne satisferait pas les néo-démocrates.
Je pense que le travail du comité doit continuer et il peut continuer et on va appuyer les motions qui nous aident à avancer le travail du comité, mais je pense que c'est insuffisant le travail du comité parce que c'est trop partisan. Et une question de notre démocratie, une question d'ingérence étrangère, c'est assez important qu'une enquête publique, c'est vraiment la façon de prendre au sérieux les allégations et de trouver des solutions qui vont protéger notre système de démocratie.
Est-ce que c'est une enquête publique ou rien d'autre? Est-ce que c'est une enquête publique ou rien d'autre?
Les deux éléments que je veux voir, donc s'il y a une autre façon d'avoir ces deux éléments, donc indépendance, non partisan et puis transparence. S'il y a une autre façon d'obtenir ça, je suis ouvert à écouter les options. Je ne sais pas s'il y a une autre option, mais je suis ouvert si ça satisfait ces deux éléments, la question de transparence et la question de non partisan indépendance. Mais dans mon avis, c'est vraiment une enquête publique qui est la meilleure façon. Mais s'il y a une autre option qui satisfait ces deux éléments, je suis ouvert à analyser cette option.
You sort of answered this, Mr. Singh, but is there maybe a compromise short of an inquiry that you would accept? Like, there has been some suggestions that perhaps all of the political leaders could be brought in and given the same high-level, top-level briefing about what our national security agencies knew, you would have that information. Would that be something that would be a compromise you'd accept?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I said really there's two broad elements that I want to see happen. And the one is around nonpartisan independence. That's one. And the second is transparency so the public knows what's going on. If those two are satisfied in another forum, I'm open to that. We've said that the public inquiry is the best way to do it, but there might be another way. I don't know exactly what that is, but there might be another path that does satisfy those two. And I would look at that and make an assessment if it does achieve the independence and the nonpartisan, as well as having clear transparency for the public. That's something that we could look at as an option.
How do you, I guess, manage the fact that you're dealing with very top secret information, where there's information that even at committee it seems that some of the spy agency folks weren't able to answer because it was a public forum? How do you manage that? How do you, like, at some point, don't you think you might have to make a compromise that because you're dealing with high-level, top-secret information that may be a public forum? I know you want transparency. I want that too as a journalist. Mm-hmm. But at some point, like, maybe that's something you might have to compromise on.
That happens all the time, though. I think it's a fair question. It happens all the time in inquiries where there are some elements of the inquiry where the information is confidential, and so then there's a portion that goes in camera or a portion that's put before. If there's a judge overseeing it, it goes before the judge, and it doesn't get to the public. There are portions of inquiries where that happens, and that is a normal course of action given, we're a G7 nation, national security interests. We don't want, for example, countries to know about the details of how our spy agency is operating or the resources that we have. And so there's certain things that may be so important that we don't want the public, we don't want it in the public discourse because it could undermine the work of our agencies. That's understandable. And so having some mechanism where that is assessed in front of an independent person like a judge who can make that assessment, this would rise to the level of having some concerns. That's fair and that's understandable. But the general principle is, given the foreign interference and given the implications that a foreign government is trying to influence, in this case, we know so far, nomination meetings, that is very serious. And we want the public to know that we're taking steps to assess exactly what happened and how broad this is, and then take steps to recommend how can we prevent this from happening in the future. That's really the goal here. That should be the goal, and that's my goal. And that's why I'm pushing for a public inquiry, or in the alternative, if there are some ways to achieve the outcome of transparency, independence, and having nonpartisan forum, then we'll look at another option as well.
So should we move more quickly on developing a foreign interference registry then, given everything that you're saying?
It's something we should look at. That's probably why a public inquiry or having someone assess all the seriousness with all the evidence in front of us and then make recommendations around what we need to do to protect ourselves. Is it a registry? Are there other rules that should be put in place? What other protections can be put in place in terms of nomination meetings and nomination meeting processes? These are all the questions that are very legitimate questions that we need to have some evidence gathering and then some expert advice around how we fix them. And that's exactly why we think a public inquiry will help us get both of those things.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être venu aujourd'hui. Si on avait dit il y a 8 ans que 9 sur 10 jeunes Canadiens allaient croire ne pas jamais pouvoir acheter une maison, ou que les jeunes allaient devoir vivre dans des centres d'hébergement lorsqu'ils font leur étude à une école postsecondaire, si on avait dit que 1 sur 5 Canadiens allaient devoir manquer des repas parce que le coût de nourriture allait être aussi haut que ce soit maintenant. Si vous avez dit, il y a 8 ans, que 30 000 personnes allaient perdre leur vie à cause des surdoses des drogues dangereuses, et si on avait dit il y a 8 ans que le gouvernement allait décriminaliser la cocaïne, l'héroïne et d'autres drogues dangereuses, on aurait dit que c'est ridicule. On n'aurait jamais imaginé l'état dans lequel nous nous trouvons aujourd'hui. Tout est brisé ici au Canada. Et en conséquence, les Canadiens souffrent de façon psychologique. On a des taux de dépression plus élevés. On a une crise de dépendance des drogues dangereuses dans nos villes où on perd 300% plus de personnes aux surdoses qu'il y a 8 ans en Colombie-Britannique. Donc, il y a une désespérance et on devrait renverser les causes de cette désespérance au lieu de dire aux gens qu'ils devraient terminer leur vie. Mais c'est exactement ce que le gouvernement Trudeau propose. Il propose que dans moins d'1 an, le gouvernement va mettre en place des règles pour que les gouvernements fournissent l'aide médicale à mourir pour les gens dont la seule condition est la dépression ou d'autres santé mentale. Le Parti conservateur n'est pas d'accord avec cette approche-là. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes ici aujourd'hui, avec le député Ed Fast qui a présenté dans la Chambre des communes une loi qui va empêcher l'aide médicale à mourir pour la santé mentale et la dépression. On a aussi la sénatrice Bathurst qui a travaillé depuis le début de sa longue carrière pour aider les gens qui ont de problèmes de santé mentale pour sauver leur vie au lieu de mettre fin à leur vie. Plusieurs experts nous disent que la dépression et d'autres problèmes de santé mentale sont des problèmes qui peuvent être traités. Et il y a des moments où les gens veulent mettre fin à leur souffrance, mais qu'avec un traitement, quelques mois plus tard, ils pourraient être très reconnaissants de la vie qu'ils ont. Donc, il faut garder l'espérance et protéger leur vie. L'aide médicale à mourir n'est pas appropriée pour la santé mentale. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle j'annonce aujourd'hui mon appui pour le projet de loi de Ed Fast afin de protéger les vies de ces gens-là. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. If you had told us 8 years ago that 9 in 10 young people would believe they could never own a home, that 35-year-olds would be living in their parents' basements, that rent would have gone from, on average, $950 to $2,200, that the average mortgage payment would have gone from $1,400 to $3,200 in just 8 years, that young people would be living in homeless shelters while they go to university. If you had said that we'd have people, 1.5 million people going to food banks, 1 in 5 skipping meals altogether, some people going to the president of a Mississauga food bank and asking for help with medical assistance and dying, not because they're sick, but because life has become so miserable. If you had said that 30,000 people would die of drug overdoses and that the federal government's solution to that would be to decriminalize cocaine, heroin, and other deadly drugs, no one would have believed you. It would have been thought ridiculous to suggest any of those things could ever happen in Canada. Yet 8 years later, after 8 years of Justin Trudeau, everything feels broken. And people feel broken. That's why many are suffering from depression and they're losing hope. Our job is to turn their hurt back into hope, to give them faith that their lives can be better tomorrow than they are today, to treat mental health problems rather than ending people's lives. Yet the government says that in less than a year, it will be providing medical assistance in dying to people whose only condition is depression or mental illness. Experts tell us that depression and mental illness can come and go, that people can be suffering and desperate today, but a few months later, be thankful that they still have their lives and their families. Our role should be to give them that hope, to help them get through the valley and back to the mountaintop. And that is why I'm pleased to support the private member's bill of Member of Parliament Ed Fast that would ensure that medical assistance and dying is not the solution to people suffering with their mental health. We also have here the senator from Saskatchewan, Senator Bathurst, who's devoted much of her senatorial work to giving hope to people who suffer from depression and to preventing suicide. She's continuing that work by supporting this bill. And so Conservatives will go forward to turn hurt into hope, to give people back control of their lives, to support their mental health, and to overcome addiction so that they can live good, happy, decent lives, as should be the Canadian promise. Thank you very much, and I now turn the floor over to Ed Fast to discuss his bill. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this presser. It is my contention that the government has moved too far and too fast in implementing its MAID legislation. My bill C-314, which is the Mental Health Protection Act, will reverse and revoke the inclusion of the mentally ill under Canada's MAID regime. Now, just to be very clear, my bill does not in any way reverse the rest of Canada's MAID regime. It is focused on protecting the most vulnerable Canadians, namely the mentally ill, who often have no one advocating for their interests. So just a little bit of context. You may recall when Bill C-14 was introduced and debated in 2016, many of us warned that Canada was treading upon a slippery slope that would quickly lead to those not at the end of their lives being included in Canada's MAID regime, placing Canada's most vulnerable groups at risk. And we were assured that our fears were unfounded. I so remember that debate. We were assured, your fears are unfounded, there's nothing to see here, don't worry and be happy. We were assured that MAID would remain an exceptional and extraordinary remedy for those experiencing intolerable and incurable pain at the end of their lives. Sadly, our fears were confirmed with the Truchon case and then the government's Bill C-7, which not only eliminated the foreseeability requirement, but extended MAID to the mentally ill. I note that the original Bill C-7 did not include mentally ill persons. In fact, the Justice Minister originally went to great lengths to explain why MAID should not be extended to the mentally ill. It was the Senate that inserted the mental health provisions into C-7, and the government accepted that amendment without protest. So let me be clear. There is no consensus across Canada that medically assisted suicide should be extended to the mentally ill. None. In fact, the government failed to engage in meaningful consultations with experts and mental health stakeholders on a variety of issues, including irremediability, competency, and the issue of suicidality. Neither did the government engage with Canadians broadly in a meaningful national discussion about what this new policy direction means for our country. Its only engagement was to strike an expert panel that was prohibited from examining the actual merits of MAID being extended to the mentally ill. All it did was tinkered around the edges with safeguards and professional standards, but it didn't address the merits of MAID being extended to the mentally ill. My bill will simply return the state of our law to what it would have been had the unelected Senate and compliant government not intervened. So those suffering from mental disorders, including depression, as the leader has mentioned, deserve the mental health and social supports and counseling they need to find some joy and some meaning in life. It is deeply concerning that this government appears to be inexorably moving from a culture of life to a culture of death. So my bill seeks to arrest that momentum and give the government and all Canadians time to reconsider the direction the government appears to be taking us when it comes to assisted suicide and euthanasia. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Since 2016, I have been fighting the expansion of assisted suicide to mental illness. As Canadians learn more about the government's plan to do this, they are genuinely shocked and rightfully appalled. My connection to this issue is a personal one. My husband was former MP Dave Batters. Actually, Dave and our leader, Pierre Polyev, were first elected together in 2004 and served together until 2008. Dave struggled with severe anxiety and depression and died by suicide in 2009, days shy of his 40th birthday. I witnessed firsthand that for someone who is mentally ill, there can be a tunnel vision that makes that person want to end his or her life, even when there are obvious viable options. I still wonder if there might have been another way out for Dave, another counselor, another medical treatment, another conversation that might have made the difference. Because of the finality of his choice, I will never know. Suicidality is often a symptom of mental illness, and expanding assisted suicide to those with mental illness will deliver to them the lethal means to end their lives. Some Canadians will die before they can access treatment that could relieve their suffering and give them years to live. Even one life lost unnecessarily is too many. Take it from someone who knows. Mental illness is not irremediable. There is always hope for someone to regain their health. That is why assisted suicide should not be extended for mental illness, and it's why my caucus colleague Ed Fast's bill is important. As a compassionate society, we must give those enduring psychological suffering help and hope, not an easier way to die. I have seen the major gaps in our mental health care system, but the answer is not to provide death as a certain and final option. The preservation of hope for people with mental illness is absolutely paramount. They need support, treatment, and our promise that we will never give up on them, even when they can see no other option but to give up on themselves. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Polyev, on the issue of China, how can the House move forward this week on allegations of interference?
We're calling on the NDP to stop helping the Liberals with their cover-up and instead invite and request high-level PMO officials like Katie Telford to testify about what they knew. Ms. Telford was a top-level campaign operative for Justin Trudeau in both the 2019 and 2021 elections, in which CSIS has found the regime in Beijing interfered. She should be called to testify about what she knew. She should also tell us what she knew about the candidate or candidates that may have been influenced by interference by the regime in Beijing. So we're calling for the NDP to vote in favor of bringing in those witnesses to hear the truth. Justin Trudeau has known about this interference for a decade because it was 10 years ago that the Trudeau Foundation got its $200,000 donation from a Beijing-backed donor, and ever since we know that the government in Beijing has been trying to influence and support Justin Trudeau. We need to know the truth about what he and his party knew throughout that decade-long period of interference.
Pour la Chine, justement, vous demandez une enquête publique. Beaucoup disent que la preuve ne pourra pas être divulguée en public parce que c'est secret. Alors, dans votre tête à vous, quelle forme prendrait cette enquête? Comment ça se ferait pour concilier ces objectifs?
Mais deux choses. Nous revendiquons une enquête indépendante et publique. Indépendante. Ça veut dire que tous les partis devraient être d'accord avec le commissaire qui va gérer cette enquête. Ça ne devrait pas être une autre présidente de la Fondation Trudeau qui le fait. Deuxièmement, on devrait divulguer l'information qui est nécessaire pour que les Canadiens sachent la vérité, tout en protégeant les secrets de l'État. Mais ce ne devrait pas être Justin Trudeau qui décide ce qui sont les secrets de l'État, parce qu'évidemment, il ne dit pas vrai, ou bien les services de renseignement ne seraient pas en train de donner cette information immédiate. Deuxièmement, il faut continuer nos enquêtes au Parlement en invitant Katie Telford et d'autres membres de l'équipe Trudeau pour qu'on sache la vérité. Ils devraient divulguer ce qu'ils savaient auparavant et ce qu'ils savent maintenant.
La question, c'est en quoi ça serait différent parce qu'il y a déjà eu tout ce processus-là, mais derrière des portes closes, parce que c'est secret. Et là, on aurait un commissaire qui ne pourrait pas divulguer grand-chose. En quoi ça serait différent?
Mais on ne sait pas. On ne sait pas si c'est... Moi, je ne crois pas que tout doit être en secret. On devrait avoir un commissaire qui est capable de distinguer entre ce qui doit être gardé et ce qui peut être divulgué. Maintenant, le problème, c'est que c'est Justin Trudeau qui a quelque chose à cacher, qui est en train de décider ce que les Canadiens apprennent. Mais lui, c'est lui qui est le sujet de cette influence étrangère, donc il est dans un conflit d'intérêts et ce n'est pas lui auquel on peut avoir confiance en décidant qu'est-ce que les Canadiens apprennent de ce scandale.
Il y a 3 de vos députés qui ont rencontré Mme Anderson. Et je ne suis pas sûr que vous ayez expliqué en public quels sont vos problèmes avec les visions de Mme Anderson. Et aussi, pour les députés qui ont dit qu'ils ne s'excusaient pas de l'avoir rencontré, est-ce que vous pouvez prendre des mesures en tant que chef?
Les députés ont déjà mis des déclarations, comme je l'ai fait déjà aussi.
Qu'est-ce que vous allez dire là-dessus? Vous ne l'avez pas dit en public, M. Poilievre. Pouvez-vous le dire en public, s'il vous plaît?
I already answered your question. J'ai déjà répondu.
M. Poilievre, pouvez-vous nous expliquer, s'il vous plaît, ce que vous pensez des politiques de Mme Anderson en public?
Can we get that response in English, please?
Why
have you imposed any consequences on members of your caucus who met with Christine Anderson, whose views yourself said were vile?
Well, I think right now what I'm more concerned about is the vile and racist views of the Prime Minister, who after over half of, if I could, over half of his adult life, dressed up in vile, racist costumes so many times that he cannot remember them all. I mean, you should be asking him, how many times did he dress up in these costumes? How many other times are there that we don't know about? And furthermore, we're also speaking out against the government giving tax dollars to vile, anti-Semitic racists that are spreading hatred across our country at the same time as supposedly the program is supposed to fight racism. So, thank you.
Their views were anti-Semitic, though, so, I mean, how are Canadians supposed to believe that those MPs didn't, or that visited Ms. Anderson didn't know what her views were, and do you have any plans to remove them from caucus?
No.
Monsieur, pourquoi vous répondez pas en français, Monsieur Poilievre, à cette question-là?
But I will tell you this. I'll tell you this. Speaking of caucus, if ever I find out that any of my members of Parliament or candidates have dressed up so many times in ugly, racist costumes that they can't remember them all, they will be thrown out and not allowed to run.
Pas la question en français, Monsieur Poilievre. Madame Anderson, no, sorry, David, to interrupt.
Sorry,
I have not received a question in English. I have not received an answer in French.
Sorry, you've had 4 questions now.
I didn't get any answer.
I would like it in English.
Would you like to do that?
I would like it in English.
Yeah, I just gave the answer in English. Go ahead.
But vous l'avez pas dit en français.
So are you going to deny him the chance to answer his question?
Of course, just on Chinese interference, Mr. Poilievre, is there a compromise short of an inquiry that you'd accept, perhaps maybe yourself being briefed on top secret documents that we've been talking about? Would you accept something like that?
No, because that's a trick and that's a trap. What they would do is bring opposition MPs or leaders into a room, give them some information, and then swear them to secrecy so they couldn't ever speak about it again. So effectively, that would be a trick to try and prevent anyone debating the subject anymore. So no, we're not going to have a situation where conservatives are told that they have to be quiet about this scandal because they're sworn to secrecy. We need is a public inquiry that is truly independent to get to the bottom of it, all while continuing the parliamentary investigation.
Last question. Just to go back to the main subject today, I wonder, would a future Poilievre government repeal the mental health extension, presuming it's going to go ahead, and would you consider the use of the notwithstanding clause in order to do so?
Well, to your first question, would we repeal it? Yes, we would repeal it. We don't believe that medical assistance in dying for people whose only condition is mental health trouble. I don't believe we would need to use the notwithstanding clause because no court has required MAID be provided for mental health alone. So the government is going way beyond anything the Supreme Court or any other court has asked for, and therefore the notwithstanding clause would not be necessary.
Preemptively? Like you don't see a world in which it could be used preemptively?
We wouldn't need to because courts have already ruled on MAID multiple times and they've never required MAID for medical illness. So we wouldn't need to use the notwithstanding clause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Great.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Je suis très heureux ce soir d'être accompagné des ministres LeBlanc, Mendicino, Rodriguez et Joly. On est ici aujourd'hui pour parler des mesures de notre gouvernement pour protéger notre démocratie et nos institutions contre l'ingérence étrangère. In the last couple of weeks, Canadians have been hearing and reading a lot about the issue of attempted foreign interference, particularly from China, in our elections. There have been questions raised about our democracy, our national security agencies, our parliament, and even our sovereignty. These questions strike us to the very core as Canadians. Les Canadiens portent attention à ces questions parce qu'ils savent que protéger notre démocratie, c'est extrêmement important. We all agree that upholding confidence in our democratic process, in our elections, in our institutions, is of utmost importance. This is not and should never be a partisan issue. I understand that people want answers and Canadians deserve reassurance. I will get to the details in a moment, but today I'm announcing that I will be appointing an independent special rapporteur who will have a wide mandate and make expert recommendations on combating interference and strengthening our democracy. But first, I want to lay out some of what we've been doing and will do further to continue to protect our democracy and our institutions. In Canada, we believe deeply in the values of freedom, openness, and dialogue. These values are not universally shared by every government around the world. Indeed, I don't know if in our lifetime we've seen democracy in a more precarious place. Many state actors and non-state actors want to foster instability here and elsewhere to advance their own interests. We have long known, and an independent report confirmed it again last week, that the Chinese government and other regimes like Iran and Russia have attempted to interfere not just in our democracy, but in our country in general, whether it's our institutions, our businesses, our research facilities, or in the daily lives of our citizens. This is not a new problem. But before we came into office, there was no dedicated process to counter foreign interference in our elections. We saw the impacts of foreign interference in places like the United States and in France during their elections in 2016 and 2017. These threats evolve and continue to evolve. We took big steps to protect the integrity of our democracy. Things we did in response to the changes we saw around us, because that's what responsible leadership does. Lors des deux dernières élections, en 2019 et en 2021, un groupe non partisan de hauts fonctionnaires a déterminé que les tentatives d'ingérence n'ont pas compromis les résultats de nos élections. This panel is part of a mechanism, a protocol, that we created in early 2019 so that independent, expert public servants can communicate clearly and impartially with Canadians during an election in the event of incidents that threaten the integrity of the federal election. After 2019, the panel and the protocol were reviewed by James Judd, former director of CSIS. And after the 2021 election, the panel and the protocol were again reviewed, this time by Maurice Rosenberg, former senior deputy minister under both Conservative and Liberal governments. Both independent reviews made recommendations that we've studied closely. Between the 2019 and 2021 elections, using Mr. Judd's recommendations, we updated the protocol and strengthened it. We are now reviewing Mr. Rosenberg's recommendations, and Minister LeBlanc is working on an implementation plan for as quickly as possible. Today, all political leaders agree that the election outcomes in 2019 and in 2021 were not impacted by foreign interference. Tous les chefs des autres partis sont d'accord que l'issue des élections de 2019 et 2021 n'a pas été impactée par une ingérence étrangère. But even if it didn't change the results of any of our elections, any interference attempt by any foreign actor is troubling and serious. Attempted interference is something that's been happening for a long time in Canada and in many other countries around the world. But how it happens is evolving, including with the rise of technology and social media. This is why, since 2015, we've taken big steps to protect the integrity of our democracy. In 2017, we created the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians so that top-secret cleared MPs and senators can look deeply into these issues. Le Comité des parlementaires sur la sécurité nationale et le renseignement réunit les représentants de tous les partis reconnus à la Chambre des communes ainsi que des représentants du Sénat. Ils détiennent tous une cote de sécurité de niveau très secret, de manière à pouvoir examiner les activités de nos organismes de sécurité nationale et du renseignement. NSICOP has examined foreign interference in the past and tabled a comprehensive report to the public and to Parliament. This report focused on the period between 2015 and 2018. They also looked at the classified report reviewing the work of the panel in the 2019 election. In 2018, we passed legislation to strengthen elections financing laws to keep foreign money out. And when we hosted the G7 summit that year in Charlevoix, we established the Rapid Response Mechanism as a way for the G7 countries to respond to diverse and evolving foreign threats to democracy. In 2019, we brought in our plan to protect democracy. This plan included the creation of the panel of independent public servants that I mentioned earlier. It also included the creation of the Security and Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force, which is made up of our top security agencies and advises the panel on potential threats. On a aussi créé l'Office de surveillance des activités en matière de sécurité nationale et de renseignement. L'OSSNR, NCIRA en anglais, est un organisme qui examine les activités liées à la sécurité nationale et au renseignement entreprises par le gouvernement. Et l'année dernière, on a déposé une nouvelle mesure législative pour protéger notre cybersécurité. These are only a few examples of what our government has done to address foreign interference since 2015, and we're working on doing more. But we have to make sure that we're taking responsible steps without jeopardizing the work of our intelligence community and nonpartisan officials to keep Canadians safe. Today, I spoke with David McGuinty, the head of NSICOP, and with Marie Deschamps, the head of NCIRA. I underscored that Canadians need to have faith in their institutions and deserve answers and transparency. I talked with them about undertaking urgent work on the issue of foreign interference within their mandates. Aujourd'hui, j'ai parlé avec David McGuinty, président du CPSNR, et avec Marie Deschamps, présidente de l'OSSNR. J'ai souligné que les Canadiens doivent avoir confiance en leurs institutions et qui méritent des réponses et de la transparence. Je leur ai parlé d'entreprendre des démarches de toute urgence dans le dossier de l'ingérence étrangère dans le cadre de leur mandat. NSICOP includes representatives from all recognized parties in the House of Commons, plus representatives from the Senate. They all already have top-secret clearances, so they can review the activities of our national security and intelligence agencies. NSICOP has already received the classified version of the report reviewing the work of the 2021 panel and will be updating their last report reviewing foreign interference with a focus on our elections. When democratic institutions are under attack, it is just that it be parliamentarians, elected officials, who should be stepping up to protect those institutions. This is why we created NSICOP, and gave them the tools to review these matters and report their findings and recommendations to Parliament. NCIRA is an external and independent expert body designed to review the collection and use of sensitive intelligence by government, including for all of our national security agencies, and ensure that they are meeting the high standards Canadians expect of them. They are well placed to determine how the system is working across intelligence agencies and government departments, what information flowed or didn't flow properly, and why. They also produce reports publicly to Parliament. Despite all of this, I know that there are people out there who don't believe that this is enough, and I get that. This is why we're entrusting further work to someone impartial. In the coming days, we will appoint an eminent Canadian to the position of independent special rapporteur, who will have a wide mandate to make expert recommendations on protecting and enhancing Canadians' faith in our democracy. In the coming weeks, the independent special rapporteur will be responsible for informing the work of NCIRA and NSICOP and any other existing processes like those by Elections Canada, and to identify any gaps in our system. The independent special rapporteur will make public recommendations which could include a formal inquiry or some other independent review process. Dans les prochains jours, on va nommer un éminent Canadien au poste de rapporteur spécial indépendant qui sera doté d'un vaste mandat afin de formuler des recommandations spécialisées sur la protection de notre démocratie. Dans les semaines à venir, le rapporteur spécial indépendant sera chargé d'orienter le travail de l'OSSNR et du CPSNR et celui effectué dans les autres processus en place, notamment à Élections Canada, en vue de cerner les lacunes dans notre système, s'il y en a. In the past few weeks, people have expressed many different views about the steps we should be taking to answer questions about foreign interference. To me, it comes down to two things: that our democratic institutions are safe from foreign interference, and that Canadians have confidence that it is so. This impartial, respected person will ensure transparency and also protection of our institutions, members of our intelligence agencies, and all Canadians. Now, some people have argued strongly that a public inquiry is the necessary next step. Some others have pointed out the flaws and challenges of a public inquiry. That's why we will ask the independent special rapporteur, as one of the first tasks of their mandate, to provide the government with a recommendation as to what the appropriate next step should be, whether it be an inquiry, an investigation, or a judicial review, and what the scope of that work may be. And we will abide by their recommendation. Comme je l'ai dit, on a fait beaucoup de travail, mais on sait qu'on peut continuer d'agir avec d'autres mesures dès maintenant pour protéger nos institutions, notre démocratie et les Canadiens contre l'ingérence étrangère. That's why I've tasked Minister Mendicino to launch, later this week, a consultation to guide how we will set up a new Foreign Influence Transparency Registry in Canada. We need to make sure there is transparency and accountability from those who advocate on behalf of foreign governments, while protecting communities who are often both targeted by attempts at foreign interference and who feel targeted when xenophobia and fear-mongering overtake legitimate concern for our democracy and national security. It's very important that we start with this consultation because we have to be mindful of history anytime we're talking about registries of foreigners in our country. I've also tasked Minister Mendicino to immediately establish a counter-foreign interference coordinator in Public Safety Canada. This office will ensure that we're taking on these issues across government in a coordinated way. J'ai demandé au ministre Mendicino de lancer, plus tard cette semaine, une consultation pour guider la mise en place d'un nouveau registre de transparence de l'influence étrangère au Canada. Je lui ai aussi demandé d'établir immédiatement au sein de Sécurité publique Canada un bureau national chargé de la coordination de la lutte contre l'ingérence étrangère. Ce bureau permettra de coordonner les efforts déployés dans l'ensemble du gouvernement pour s'attaquer à ces problèmes. I've also tasked Minister LeBlanc and the Clerk of the Privy Council to review and bring forward a plan to implement any outstanding recommendations from NSICOP, the Rosenberg Report, and any other reviews on these matters in the next 30 days. J'ai également chargé le ministre LeBlanc et la greffière du Conseil privé de présenter un plan pour la mise en œuvre de toutes les recommandations en suspens formulées par le CPSNR et dans le rapport Rosenberg, ainsi que d'examiner ce plan et toute autre question connexe dans les 30 prochains jours. And finally, today I can announce that we're investing $5.5 million to build capacity of civil society organizations to combat disinformation. Because we know disinformation, often generated abroad, can be a real threat to our elections, and it's a threat that the federal government cannot combat alone. Je veux être très clair. Toute attaque ou tentative d'attaque contre notre démocratie est inacceptable. On va continuer de renforcer nos institutions afin de défendre leur intégrité. We will always stand firm when it comes to defending our national security. Just like we stood firm when we worked day and night to bring back the two Michaels after they were arbitrarily detained in China, including over the course of the 2019 and 2021 elections. As Canadians, we all felt a collective effort to work together to bring them home, and we felt tremendous relief when we finally got them home. But let's remember that throughout, there were repeated calls by eminent Canadians, both conservative and liberal, to simply capitulate to the Chinese government, to give in to their demands, to ignore our extradition treaty with the United States, and ignore the values and the principles of rule of law on which Canada is grounded. But we didn't. We stood strong as a government. We stood strong as Canadians for our values and for the rule of law, and we got them home that way. That's what a Prime Minister does. That's what responsible leadership is. Foreign interference is a complex landscape that should not be boiled down to sound bites and binary choices. And it should certainly not be about partisan politics. As politicians, we work hard on building trust with Canadians every single day. But it is also our duty to do everything we can so that Canadians can trust our institutions now and into the future. Because our institutions will and must outlast every politician. En tant que politicien, on travaille à chaque jour pour établir des liens de confiance avec les gens. Mais c'est aussi notre devoir de le faire de façon et de faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour susciter la confiance des Canadiens dans nos institutions, aujourd'hui et dans l'avenir. Our institutions are the foundations of our democracy. Even when they're strong, even when they're sturdy, if there's a perception that they might not be, it needs to be addressed. And we need to work beyond partisanship to work together. Canada is one of the most stable democracies in the world, but that didn't happen by accident, and it will not continue without effort. So to all Canadians, this is an issue that we continue to take extremely seriously, and we will continue this work to uphold and strengthen your confidence in our democracy in Canada. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you for listening. And are the steps that Justin Trudeau brought about with having an ultimate person in charge of watchdogging the election process and reporting back to Parliament with what their findings are and determining what the next steps are to ensure that the election process is safeguarded? Are his steps really going to help, or is he putting a Band-Aid over it? What is going to really happen to prevent foreign interference from those who might want to tear down democracy? What are those steps really going to be in the end when we get through the whole entire process that Justin Trudeau is talking about? Is his process going to be too lengthy and drawn out to really be effective? We'll have to see. What is really going to take to make sure that interference of any type into a democratic process is halted, rooted out, and curbed? So, at this time, we want to ask any of you who haven't clicked that subscribe button, please do click the subscribe button so we can give you continued updates on what is happening in our world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.